Hello and welcome to this Aston Originals podcast from Aston History. I am Brian Sudlow, lecturer in history at Aston University. Once again, I'm joined by Mr John Dyson, head of history at Broadway Academy and author of best-selling books also on Sheffield Wednesday. John, welcome to the podcast. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to see you.
Now, if you've not already seen Mr. Dyson's video about sources, it might be useful to go and have a look at that one first, because in this podcast, Mr. Dyson's going to be talking about interpretations. Now, sources and interpretations, these two always go together, don't they, for the historian? John, so what do we mean by interpretations?
Yeah, there's a specific meaning at A level, which is simply the interpretations are the points of view of historians. They will give the students a paragraph, 150, 200 words, times 2, times 3, depending on the exam board, giving differing perspectives from historians.
Okay, and I mean, what's the significance of a student being able to talk about interpretations within the context of the history exam?
Again, it's in similar to where I talked about the sources one in the previous podcast. The government are interested in students thinking like historians. Right? They want A-level students to be knowledgeable about a particular topic and be brave enough to challenge or support what the historians have said about that topic.
Okay. So there are prizes here then, essentially, both for knowing about what historians have said, but then presumably also for being able to reflect on that from a critical perspective, seeing its shortcomings, seeing its limitations, or seeing its implications.
Yeah, exactly those things. As I say, the exam boards go about it in slightly different ways. I mean, AQA and OCR both asked a broadly similar question, which is how convincing are these extracts, are these interpretations about X topic? EdXL go about it a slightly different way. They give you a quote and then two interpretations kind of on or either side of that quote for the student to focus on. How convincing do you find the view that Thatcher transformed Britain, for example, and they'll have a historian on either side of that, and the students make their mind up whether they find the argument more convincing based on the historians. Plus, of course, as we talked about with all these things, there's their own contextual knowledge to support all this.
Okay, so in fact that's where knowledge comes in, in order to make sure that things are well contextualized. Okay, look, what should a student not miss out when they're tackling this whole issue of interpretations? What are the essential things to make sure they get clear?
Yeah, it's three things really. It's first of all being brave enough to understand that this is what you're doing, and as a historian, an 18-year-old historian, it's perfectly fine to challenge the historians that they're given, the interpretations they're given. The first thing that the students have got to figure out is what the interpretation is saying. They summarise it. Interpretations that they give them will have an overall argument, but they might well have 1-2 sub-arguments underneath. So if they can pick all that out, the kind of overall theme of the interpretation is, plus what is kind of sat beneath that to support it. That's the first bit. And sometimes, of course, historians don't always write in the point evidence explained thing. They might not say exactly what they mean in the first sentence. The students have got to figure it out from the whole kind of meat of the paragraph that they're given. So that's not a straightforward kind of comprehension task as it might seem. They've got to read it very carefully, think about the whole thing, and break it down into the full argument plus sub-arguments underneath. So that's number one. And then simply, again, the questions vary somewhat, but to follow that up, they then identify what knowledge they have, the students have, to support or challenge as necessary, to figure where the limitations are, to figure where the strengths are, and to finally reach that same judgment that we've talked about several times in these clips to answer the flipping question. That judgment, though, has got to be valid and substantiated. If they're making a judgment about whether an interpretation is a convincing one, they need to have some solid knowledge to support that. One thing that students don't need to include, and this is sometimes where they get a little bit mixed up between this and sources, it doesn't matter who wrote the interpretation. They're not interested in the name of the historian when it was written. Those kind of things, with the school of historical thought and any of that kind of business. It may as well be written by historian A and historian B. It's what they're saying and what the students can figure out from that, and whether they can support it with their own knowledge and reach a judgment.
Okay, fantastic. Any final points to make about interpretations, or?
Just to be careful of the questions. I say we're talking broadly here, and each exam board does it ever slightly differently. OCR have 2 interpretations, AQA have 3, EdXL have 2. So my usual final point of answering the question is the important one. And my kind of second often repeated point about being brave enough as the 18-year-old historian to say, well, you know what, this guy's got it wrong, or this guy focuses more on this and not so much on that. Be brave enough and confident enough in their own knowledge to take those things on and go for it.
Understood. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Dyson. I think that's such a comprehensive overview of interpretations. I always like to use the metaphor of maps and territories. You know, the map is not the territory. The map is all these different interpretations that are out there, but the territory, the real past, as it were, you know, those are the sources that we talked about in that other podcast. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Good luck to anyone who's watching this podcast with their history A-level. Make sure you have a look at our other podcasts giving tips for A-level history students. And we hope to see you again on another Ask the Original podcast very soon. Thank you.